A man's true strength is not in his fists but in what he refuses to ignore. An old man serves tea in a small Chinatown restaurant. His hands tremble with age. 3 drunk young men sit in the corner. One slaps the tray from his hands. Another grabs his apron and yanks him forward hard. Porcelain shatters on the floor. He bows and whispers, "Please, no trouble." Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. Then the door opens. A young man walks in. He doesn't shout. He pulls out a chair and sits right at their table. He picks up a single chopstick. That young man is Bruce Lee. And what he does with that one chopstick will bring 3 grown men to their knees. Not from pain, from shame. But what can one chopstick do to silence an entire room? If the story moves you, subscribe and stay for what comes next. San Francisco, 1964. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand something. Bruce Lee was not yet Bruce Lee. Not the legend. Not the movie star. Not the man whose name would one day be spoken in the same breath as the greatest fighters who ever lived. In 1964, he was 23 years old. He ran a small martial arts school in Chinatown. A Kwun. Barely more than a rented room with a wooden floor and a few mirrors on the wall. He had maybe a dozen students. Some weeks he couldn't make rent. He taught Wing Chun and Junfan Gung Fu to anyone willing to listen, and most people weren't. See, in those days, a Chinese man teaching martial arts to non-Chinese students was considered a betrayal. The old guard didn't trust him. The American public didn't take him seriously. He was caught between 2 worlds, and neither one wanted to claim him. But here's the thing about Bruce Lee that most people get wrong. They think his power came from speed, from his fists, from that famous 1-inch punch. No, his real power came from something much quieter. Came from what he noticed, what he chose to see when everyone else looked away. And that night on Grant Avenue he noticed everything. The restaurant was called Jade Lily. Tiny place. 6 tables, maybe 7. The kind of spot where the menu hadn't changed since 1948 and the wallpaper was older than most of the customers. It smelled like jasmine rice and soy sauce and old wood. Mr. Chun had run it alone for the last 11 years, ever since his wife passed. He opened at 5 in the morning. He closed at 10 at night. Every single day. No help. No days off. The man was 78 years old. And he moved through that kitchen like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Because, believe me, it was. Now, Bruce Lee didn't come to the Jade Lily for the dumplings. He came for Mr. Chun. The old man was from Foshan, same province as Bruce's father. And in a city that often felt cold and foreign, Mr. Chun was the closest thing Bruce had to home. They'd sit together after closing, drinking tea, and Mr. Chun would talk about the old days. About training in the courtyards of Foshan. About a time when Kung Fu wasn't a movie trick but a way of living. Bruce listened. He always listened. Because Mr. Chun wasn't just an old restaurant owner. He was a retired Kung Fu master. His hands, the ones that now shook when he poured tea, had once broken boards, redirected blades, and moved faster than most men could blink. But age takes everything, doesn't it? It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't negotiate. It just arrives. And by 1964, Mr. Chen's body had surrendered. His legs were weak. His back was bent. His fingers curled inward like they were holding on to something invisible. He walked with a cane. He bowed to every customer who entered, not because he had to, but because it was the only language of respect he still trusted. That night, Bruce arrived later than usual. He'd been at the Kwun until almost 9, working with a student who couldn't get the centerline theory right. He was tired. His knuckles ached from hitting the wooden dummy. He crossed the street toward the Jade Lily, and through the window he saw them. 3 young men, white, mid-20s, big, loud, drunk, sitting in the corner like they owned the room. One had his boots on the chair. Another was tossing peanut shells onto the floor. The third, the biggest one, was leaning back with his arms crossed. watching Mr. Chun the way a cat watches something small and helpless. Bruce stopped at the door. He didn't go in right away. He watched. Mr. Chun approached their table carrying a tray of tea. His hands shook. The cups rattled against the saucers. The biggest one looked at the shaking tray and grinned. "Hey, old man. You having an earthquake or what?" The other two laughed. Mr. Chun bowed his head and set the tray down carefully. "Very sorry," he said. "Hands not so good." The young man leaned forward. "Hands not so good? Then maybe you shouldn't be carrying things." "Huh?" He flicked the edge of the tray. One cup slid off and shattered on the floor. Mr. Chun flinched. He bent down slowly, painfully, to pick up the pieces. And that's when the second one grabbed his apron. Grabbed it hard. Yanked him forward so the old man stumbled and nearly fell. "What's wrong, Grandpa? You gonna kung fu us?" More laughter. The few other customers in the restaurant looked at their plates. One couple near the window stood up and left without paying. Nobody said a word. Nobody moved. Mr. Chun, on his knees now, gathering broken porcelain with bleeding fingers, whispered the only words he had left. "Please. No trouble." Bruce Lee's jaw tightened. His hand pressed flat against the doorframe, and something behind his eyes shifted. Not rage. Not yet. Something older. Something inherited. Something that every person from Foshan carries in their bones. A code. You do not touch an elder. You do not mock a man who has survived more than you can imagine. You do not make him kneel. Bruce pushed the door open, and he walked in. He didn't rush. That's the part people always get wrong when they imagine Bruce Lee in a confrontation. They picture speed. They picture flying kicks and spinning fists. But the truth is, the most dangerous thing Bruce Lee ever did in a room was walk slowly. He crossed the restaurant floor without looking at anyone else. His eyes were locked on the table in the corner. The three young men saw him coming. The one with his boots on the chair sat up. The one tossing peanut shells stopped mid-throw. The biggest one, the leader, narrowed his eyes and tilted his head like a dog hearing a sound it doesn't recognize. Bruce pulled out the empty fourth chair at their table. He sat down, calm, relaxed, like he'd been invited. Now get this. He didn't say a word. Not right away. He just looked at each of them, one at a time, the way a man reads a contract before he signs it. Measuring, calculating, deciding. The biggest one broke the silence. "Who the hell are you?" Bruce didn't answer. Instead, he reached across the table and picked up a single wooden chopstick. Just one. He held it between his index finger and his thumb, lightly, the way you'd hold a pencil. The three men looked at the chopstick, then at each other, then back at Bruce. One of them laughed. A short, nervous laugh. The kind that comes out when your brain hasn't decided yet whether something is funny or dangerous. Then Bruce flicked his wrist. One motion. No wind-up. No warning. The chopstick left his fingers and crossed 6 feet of air in less time than it takes to blink. It hit the wooden menu board hanging on the far wall and punched clean through it. The pointed end stuck out the other side by a full inch. The board swung on its nail and then went still. The restaurant went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind that presses down on your chest. The three men stared at the menu board. Then they stared at the hole. Then they stared at Bruce Lee. He hadn't moved. His hand was still in the same position. His expression hadn't changed. He looked like a man who had just set down a cup of tea. "That man," Bruce said, and his voice was so low you had to lean in to hear it. He pointed to Mr. Chun, who stood frozen by the kitchen door, blood still on his fingertips from the broken porcelain. "That man has more strength in his trembling hands than you three will ever carry in your entire bodies." He paused. Let the words land. "Now you will stand up. You will pick up every broken piece from this floor. You will bow to him. And you will leave." The biggest one opened his mouth. Maybe to argue. Maybe to threaten. But Bruce wasn't finished. "Or the next chopstick won't hit the wall. Believe me when I tell you, those weren't empty words. Everyone in that room knew it. The air itself knew it. The biggest one looked at his two friends. Whatever courage the alcohol had given them was gone, burned off like fog in sunlight. One by one, all three of them got down on their knees. They picked up every shard of broken porcelain from that floor. They placed the pieces on the counter gently, like the fragments were suddenly precious. Then they turned to Mr. Chun, and they bowed. Not a nod, not a half gesture, a full bow. The kind you give when you've been broken open and there's nothing left to pretend. They walked out without a word. The door closed behind them. The restaurant exhaled. And for a moment, just a moment, everything was still. Mr. Chun stood behind the counter with tears running down his face. Bruce sat at the table with the three empty chairs around him. The other customers looked at their plates. Nobody spoke. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The tea on Mr. Chen's counter was still warm. And if you had walked in at that exact second, you would have thought nothing had happened at all. Just a quiet little restaurant on a quiet little street in Chinatown. Peace. The kind of peace that fools you into thinking the worst is over. But it wasn't over. Not even close. 20 minutes later, the front door of the Jade Lily slammed open so hard the glass panel cracked down the middle. Bruce was behind the counter helping Mr. Chun bandage his cut fingers when the sound hit. He looked up, and what he saw changed the nature of the entire night. It wasn't the same three men. It was 7. The original 3 had come back, and they'd brought 4 more. Bigger, older, sober. And one of them, the one standing in front, wore a leather jacket with a patch on the chest that Bruce recognized immediately. Iron Dogs. A street gang that ran protection rackets through 6 blocks of Chinatown. They weren't drunk kids looking for laughs anymore. This was business. Now here's the thing. Bruce Lee was not afraid of 7 men. I want to be clear about that. By 1964, he had already fought in back-alley challenge matches in Hong Kong as a teenager. He had sparred with boxers, wrestlers, and judo practitioners twice his size. Physically, he could handle what was standing in front of him. But this wasn't about what his body could do. This was about what would happen next. Because if Bruce Lee, a Chinese martial arts instructor, sent 7 members of the Iron Dogs to the hospital, the story wouldn't be about a young man defending an old man. The story would be about a violent foreigner who attacked Americans. The newspapers would print it that way. The police would see it that way. His Kun would be shut down. His students would disappear. Everything he was building in this country would be finished before it started. And he knew it. He knew it the second he saw that patch. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was maybe 40. Thick neck. Shaved head. Hands like catcher's mitts. He didn't look at Bruce. He looked at Mr. Chun. You the owner? Mr. Chun nodded, his bandaged fingers trembling at his sides. Then you owe us for embarrassing our boys. He jerked his thumb at the original 3, who stood in the back looking at the floor. Way I see it, you let some stranger come in here and threaten them. That's your fault. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay us $500. Tonight. Or we're going to take this place apart piece by piece. And when we're done, we'll make sure no one in Chinatown rents to you again. $500. In 1964, that was more than Mr. Chun made in 2 months. It might as well have been 5 million. Mr. Chen's mouth opened but nothing came out. His eyes went to Bruce. And in that look was something Bruce had never seen in the old man before. Not just fear. Defeat. The look of a man who had survived war, famine, and immigration, only to be broken by 3 drunk kids and their older friends in a restaurant he'd given his life to. Bruce stepped forward. He's not paying you anything. The leader turned to him for the first time, looked him up and down. Bruce was 5'7", 140 pounds. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and black pants. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a busboy. And who are you supposed to be? I'm the stranger who embarrassed your boys. The room shifted. The leader's expression hardened. He took a step closer. Then maybe you're the one who's going to pay. Now, this is where Bruce Lee made a choice. And I'll be honest with you. It might have been the wrong one. He could have backed down. He could have offered to negotiate. He could have walked out that door and called the police. though in 1964 Chinatown, the police were not exactly rushing to help Chinese business owners. But Bruce didn't do any of those things. Instead, he did something that made everything worse. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a polite smile. The kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't." The kind of smile that takes a dangerous situation and pours gasoline on it. "You brought 7 men to collect $500 from a 78-year-old man who weighs 120 pounds, Bruce said. "If that doesn't embarrass you more than anything I could do, then you're already lost." The leader's face went red. He reached behind his back and pulled out a steel pipe, about 2 feet long, the kind of pipe that breaks bones on the first swing and ends arguments on the second. He pointed it directly at Bruce's chest. "Last chance, little man. Walk out, or get carried out." Bruce didn't move. Behind him, Mr. Chun grabbed his arm. "Bruce, please, no trouble. Like me. No trouble." The old man's voice was barely a whisper. His grip was weak, but his eyes were begging. And that's when Bruce realized the truth. This was never about money. This was never about the Iron Dogs or their reputation. This was about Mr. Chun. About whether the old man would spend the rest of his years on his knees or on his feet. About whether the last chapter of his life would be written in fear or in dignity. And that decision, right there, that was worth more than a coin. Worth more than a career. Worth more than everything Bruce Lee hadn't built yet. He gently removed Mr. Chen's hand from his arm. He looked the old man in the eye, and he said 4 words that Mr. Chun would remember for the rest of his life. "I am your student." Then he turned back to face the 7 men, and the steel pipe, and whatever was coming next. The leader swung first. A wide, heavy arc aimed at Bruce's left temple. The kind of swing that puts a man on the ground and keeps him there. But Bruce wasn't there when it arrived. He had moved. Not backward. Forward. Underneath the arc, closing the distance so fast that the leader's arm was still extended when Bruce's palm struck his wrist. The pipe clattered to the floor. And before the leader could even register what had happened, Bruce grabbed his extended arm, twisted it at the elbow, and redirected his entire body weight forward into the nearest table. The table broke. The leader didn't get up. Now here's what people don't understand about Bruce Lee in a real fight. It wasn't about flashy kicks. It wasn't about combinations. It was about economy. One move. One purpose. Every strike had a destination, and every destination was the end of the conversation. There were no extra movements. No wasted energy. It was like watching someone write a sentence with exactly the right number of words. Nothing more. Nothing less. The second man came from the right. He was fast for his size. He threw a straight punch at Bruce's jaw. Bruce slipped it by an inch, caught the man's fist in his open palm, and drove his other hand straight into the man's solar plexus. The man folded like a lawn chair. His knees hit the floor and he stayed there, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The third and fourth came together. Believe me, that was their mistake. 2 men in a tight space get in each other's way. Bruce sidestepped the first, used his momentum against him, and sent him stumbling into the second. While they were tangled up, he delivered 2 short, sharp strikes. One to the ribs. One to the knee. Both men went down. One crawled toward the door. The other didn't move at all. That left 3. The original 3. The drunk ones who'd started all of this by slapping tea from an old man's hands. They stood near the back wall, pressed together, their eyes wide. They'd already seen what one chopstick could do. Now they'd watched 4 of their friends hit the ground in less than 10 seconds. Whatever fight they had in them was gone. One of them raised his hands. "We're done. We're done. We don't want any part of this." Bruce stood in the center of the restaurant. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't sweating. His white t-shirt didn't have a wrinkle on it. He looked at the 3 young men against the wall. Then he looked at the 4 on the floor. Then he did something that none of them expected. He knelt down beside the leader, who was groaning on the wreckage of the broken table, and he helped him sit up, gently, the way you'd help someone who'd fallen on ice. The leader stared at him, confused, his arm still throbbing from the twist. "You came here tonight to take something from a man who has nothing left to give," Bruce said quietly. But I didn't come here to take anything from you. I came here to show you what you almost destroyed. He pointed to Mr. Chun. The old man was standing behind the counter. Not hiding. Standing. His back was straighter than it had been all night. His hands, still bandaged, still trembling, were pressed flat on the countertop. And his eyes were not on the men on the floor. They were on Bruce. And in those eyes was something that went beyond gratitude. It was recognition. The look of a master seeing his art performed not for glory, not for victory, but for the only reason it was ever meant to be used. Protection. Look at him, Bruce said to the leader. Really look. That man was breaking boards before you were born. He was training in courtyards while your father was learning to walk. He came to this country with nothing and built this place with his bare hands. And you came in here and made him kneel. For what? For fun? For $500. The leader looked at Mr. Chun. And for the first time that night, he actually saw him. Not as a target. Not as a weak old man. As a person. Get up, Bruce said. All of you, get up and leave. And if I ever hear that anyone from your crew has set foot in this restaurant again, I won't be using chopsticks. They left. All 7 of them. Some walking. Some limping. The last one out the door was the biggest one, the leader, and he paused in the doorway. He didn't say anything, but he nodded. Once. A small, almost invisible nod. The kind a man gives when he's been beaten so thoroughly that anger has turned into something else. Not respect exactly, but close. The door closed, and this time the silence that followed was real. Bruce stood in the middle of the restaurant for a long moment. The broken table, the scattered chairs, the steel pipe still on the floor where it had fallen. He looked at it all, and then he did something that, if you didn't know Bruce Lee, might surprise you. He picked up a broom from behind the counter and started sweeping. No victory speech. No dramatic exit. He just started cleaning up. Mr. Chun watched him for a few seconds. Then the old man reached under the counter with his bandaged hands and pulled out a dustpan. He walked over to where Bruce was sweeping. Slowly, painfully, but upright. And together, without saying a word, the 2 of them cleaned that restaurant from one end to the other. Now, I want to stop here and tell you something, because this is the part of the story that matters most, and it's the part that most people would skip over. They'd want to end on the fight, on the drama, on Bruce Lee dropping 4 men in 10 seconds. And sure, that's impressive. That's the part that makes your jaw drop. But the real story, the one that changes you if you let it, is what happened after the last man walked out. They cleaned for almost an hour. Bruce righted the broken table and stacked it against the wall. He mopped the floor where tea and porcelain and a little bit of blood had mixed together. He washed every dish in the sink. Mr. Chun moved beside him, drying cups and placing them back on the shelves with hands that shook but did not stop. Neither of them spoke. And in that silence was something sacred. The kind of silence that exists between 2 people who understand each other without needing explanation. When the restaurant was clean, Mr. Chun did something he hadn't done in years. He walked to the back of the kitchen, to a high shelf that no customer had ever seen, and he took down a wooden box. It was old. The wood was dark with age and the hinges were green with rust. He carried it to the front counter and set it down in front of Bruce. "Open," he said. Bruce opened the box. Inside, resting on a piece of faded red silk, was a pair of iron rings. Training rings, the kind that kung fu practitioners in Foshan used to wear on their forearms during drills. They were heavy, scarred, worn smooth in places from decades of use. Bruce picked one up and felt the weight of it in his hand. He understood immediately what he was holding. These were Mr. Chen's. From his training days. From the courtyards. From a life that existed before the restaurant, before America, before the cane and the shaking hands. "My teacher gave me these," Mr. Chun said. His voice was steady now, steadier than Bruce had ever heard it. "In Foshan. I was 22. He told me, wear these every day until they feel like nothing. Then you will know what real strength is. Not the weight you carry, the weight you forget." He pushed the box toward Bruce. "Now they are yours." Bruce shook his head. "Sifu, I can't take these. Mr. Chun reached across the counter and placed his trembling hand on top of Bruce's. "You called yourself my student tonight. In front of those men. In front of danger. A man who calls himself a student in a moment like that is not pretending. He is telling the truth." Bruce looked at the rings. Then at Mr. Chun. The old man's face was calm. His tears had dried. And in his eyes was something that Bruce would carry with him for the rest of his life. Not sadness. Not gratitude. Authority. The quiet, unshakable authority of a man who has finally passed on the thing that matters most. Bruce bowed. Not a quick bow. Not a polite bow. A full bow. Forehead nearly touching the counter. The kind of bow that a student gives to a master. The kind that says everything words cannot. Mr. Chun placed his hand on the back of Bruce's head. Gently. The way a father would. "In Foshan," the old man whispered, "we do not bow to the man who fights for us. We bow to the man who stays after the fight is over." They sat together for another hour after that. Mr. Chun made tea. Not the tea he served customers. A different tea. From a tin he kept on the highest shelf behind the box with the rings. Oolong from Fujian province. The kind his wife used to make. He hadn't opened that tin since she passed. He poured 2 cups. They drank in silence. And somewhere in that silence, something broke open inside Mr. Chun. A wall that had been standing for 11 years. He talked about his wife. About how she used to sing while she folded dumplings. About how she could tell the weather by the way the tea leaves settled in the cup. About how she died on a Tuesday morning and the restaurant was empty, and he held her hand on the kitchen floor and didn't call anyone for 3 hours because he wasn't ready to let go. It was the first time Mr. Chun had spoken about her to another person since the funeral. And it was the first time he had cried in front of anyone. Not the silent tears from earlier that night. Real crying. The kind that comes from a place so deep you didn't even know it was there. Bruce listened. He didn't try to comfort him. He didn't offer advice. He just listened. Because sometimes, believe me, that is the only thing a person needs. Not rescue. Not wisdom. Just someone who will sit with them in the dark and not look away. They closed the restaurant together that night. Mr. Chun turned off the lights. Bruce locked the front door. They stood on the sidewalk on Grant Avenue, and the street was empty. The fog had come in the way it does in San Francisco. Quiet and thick. The street lamp on the corner made a yellow circle on the wet pavement. Mr. Chun leaned on his cane and looked at the sign above the door. Jade Lily. He'd painted it himself 20 years ago. The letters were faded now, chipped in places. "Tomorrow," Mr. Chun said quietly, "I will repaint the sign." Bruce smiled. Not the dangerous smile from earlier. A real one. Warm. "I'll bring the brushes." They parted that night with a handshake. And if you could have watched it, you would have noticed something. Mr. Chen's hand still trembled. It always would. But his grip was firm. And Bruce held it for a long time. Longer than a handshake usually lasts. Because both of them understood that what had happened that night wasn't about a fight in a restaurant. It was about a line in the world. A line between people who look away and people who don't. Between people who walk past suffering and people who pull out a chair and sit down in the middle of it. Bruce Lee went on to become many things. A fighter. A teacher. A philosopher. A movie star. A legend. He changed the way the world saw martial arts. He changed the way the world saw Asian men. He broke barriers that people said couldn't be broken and did things on screen that people said couldn't be done. But if you had asked him on any night at any point in his life what moment made him who he was, I believe he would not have talked about the movies. He would not have talked about the championships or the fame or the philosophy. I believe he would have talked about a small restaurant on Grant Avenue. A broken teacup on the floor. An old man on his knees. And the moment he decided that looking away was never going to be an option. Because that's the thing about Bruce Lee that the world remembers wrong. They remember the fists. They remember the speed. They remember the sound he made when he struck. But the people who actually knew him, the people who sat with him, the people who watched him sweep a floor at midnight for a man who couldn't sweep it himself, those people remember something else entirely. They remember a man who bowed, and meant it,